So it's my pleasure to introduce Tim and Steve for this fourth session on Adobe. And we haven't had a session on Lightroom before, so I'm really looking forward to this as well. So over to you guys.
Abigail, thank you so much. I'm actually only going to be with you for the first 5-10 minutes, and then I'm going to hand it over to Steve. So for those who haven't met me before, I'm Dr. Tim Hitchin. I'm Adobe's Senior Education Specialist for the Asia Pacific region. I was a classroom teacher for 23 years, and then about 10 years ago, or maybe 11 years ago now, Adobe were looking for someone who taught in primary, secondary, and higher ed. And I've had this wonderful opportunity to do this job and engage with students and teachers literally all over the world. In fact, just last week, I was in San Francisco. That's right, we're traveling again, folks. It was just wonderful to be overseas and to meet a lot of my colleagues, old and new. And we've got so many exciting things happening in the world of Adobe for education globally. And so much that I can't tell you at the moment. If I was able to, I would, but I probably wouldn't have time to cover it all. But thank you for coming to the session. A special thank you to those who have joined us for the very first time for these Adobe sessions. And we do about 12 a year for South Australian Department for Education. And it's often a core group of teachers that come to most events, and then a lot who watch the recordings afterwards. So thank you for being committed to these and to learning more about these amazing tools that we have available for any curriculum area. And I emphasize the word any curriculum area. It's not just about the arts. It's not just about IT. It's not just about media, but our tools are being used by English teachers, humanities teachers, maths and science teachers are using our tools on a daily basis to encourage creativity and, most importantly, engagement into the curriculum. Look, I'd like to actually introduce Steve, but then I'm going to take over again in a minute. Steve, tell us a bit about your background.
Now, of course, you have to come out of mute in order to start speaking. So my background, I'm not going to say exactly how long, but I've been in the graphics industry for a very long time. Been with Adobe for around about 13, 14 years, on and off since 2005. Before that, I did work in my own business, both teaching Adobe software and using Adobe software professionally. So a long time association with the software and working in lots of different industries, from government to advertising to big banks. So lots of different experiences within that area. So of course, all the time, Adobe software has been my mainstay and my reason for working, really.
And it's been great to be working with you. Steve and I have known each other for 10 years now. I'm coming up to almost my 10th year of working at Adobe, and it's been terrific to work with people like Steve, who are experts in the software, but also have a huge background and career with how these applications are being used in industry. And that's what's really exciting about what we're going to be sharing with you today, which is a focus on Lightroom and Photoshop. Thank you to everyone who's just joined us too, which is wonderful. I'm going to share my screen quickly. And for those who've just joined us, I'm only going to be with you for a few minutes, and then I'm going to throw it over to Steve for this session. Let me just bring the audio on.
Let me stop presenting.
How are you going, Abigail? You can see my screen now?
Yes, we can see you.
Excellent, good. So I want to play this quick clip. This gives you an overview of how our tools are being used in education.
Adobe is the global leader when it comes to digital creativity software. Adobe applications are used at the highest levels of the multimedia and communications industries, as well as in primary schools, secondary schools, and universities all over the globe to enhance digital literacy, communication, and creativity. Adobe creativity software is now divided into two special homes, Creative Cloud Express and the Creative Cloud. Formerly known as Adobe Spark, Adobe Creative Cloud Express is a set of very simple to use creativity tools that can be used by anyone in any curriculum area and level to build powerful graphics, video stories, and web pages. Adobe Creative Cloud Express for Education also includes the powerful Adobe Premiere Rush video editing application, as well as Photoshop Express, and is totally free of charge for K-12 schools around the world. The Adobe Creative Cloud is the home of Adobe's well-known industry standard applications such as Photoshop, Illustrator, InDesign, Premiere Pro, XD, and a total of about 50 desktop, mobile, and web-based applications and resources. Other apps that are part of the Adobe Creative Cloud include Acrobat DC for creating, managing, and editing PDF documents and creating a paperless experience. Character Animator for real-time animation. Fresco, the ultimate drawing tool for the iPad and Surface Pro. Lightroom for outstanding photo editing. Aero for creating augmented reality experiences. After Effects for serious video effects and composites. And Audition for multi-track audio editing and podcasting. Get to know these applications through the Adobe Education Exchange, edx.adobe.com, which now has over 1 million members across the globe with a wide variety of free teaching resources and self-paced, on-demand professional development courses for educators. The Adobe Education Exchange is also the gateway to the Adobe Creative Educator program. This is a multi-level badging program designed for any educator in any curriculum area. You don't have to be an Adobe expert to be an Adobe Creative Educator. Scan this QR code or look up adobe.ly/edu events to find out more about coming events that Adobe is running for teachers, and use this QR code or look up adobe.ly/contact-edu-apac to get in touch with the Adobe Education team or subscribe to their monthly newsletter. Please let your colleagues know about what is possible with Adobe's amazing tools to enhance digital literacy, communication, and creativity in the teaching and learning process.
So a lot of those resources I've just put into the chat for you, so you can follow up on those if you're interested. And Steve, I'll get you at the end of your session just to remind people that those resources are there, particularly that contact form, because we'd love you, if you're not already part of our email list, I do a newsletter once a month that shares a whole lot of resources for teachers. And if you're not already on that email list, then that's a way of getting onto it. Just a couple more things from me. We've got Adobe Teach Meets coming up. There are a group of sessions that we run with our Adobe education leaders who offer a range of different workshop hands-on experiences in small groups for you. And you can see May 25 and 26, I think it's a Wednesday and a Thursday afternoon. You can go in, you can decide which section you want to be part of and just meet with these experts to find out more about how to use these tools. I can see Steve's lovely face there. I think that's left over from the last Teach Meet session we did when you did something on Acrobat. And Steve, you're doing
17 years ago as well.
Yeah, well, I wasn't going to say that. And Steve is also going to be presenting for us at the next session. But these experts are fantastic, and I really encourage you to look up adobe.ly/teachmeets to find out more about that, and then share it with your colleagues so that they can get involved too. Every session involves a very simple tool, but for those people who are brand new to Adobe, but also the option of learning a professional tool, especially if you're more experienced in the world of Adobe in education. Finally, from me, we have just launched our summit for this year. It's going to be held on Wednesday, the 28th of September. It's going to be it's actually going to be a hybrid event, mainly virtual. We're expecting thousands of teachers virtually, and we'll have about 30 Adobe education leaders face-to-face in the Sydney office who will be presenting to you, as well as educators from around the world for this summit. Our keynote speaker is Dr. Tim Paxton, who is Australia's leading researcher in the area of creativity and innovation. and he's a fantastic presenter and a wonderful researcher, and we're looking forward to hearing from him. So look up adobe.ly/APAC-edu-summit22 to register for that free summit. It's during the school holidays, and it's a day that you will not regret being part of. I'll put that link into the chat once I've finished here. Here's a little quick advertisement for the summit.
Hi folks, the 2022 APAC Adobe Education Summit is being held on Wednesday, the 28th of September, which is a school holiday period for most of you. Dr. Tim Paxton, Australia's leading researcher and consultant in the field of creativity and innovation in education, will be our special guest, and you'll also be hearing from the global Adobe Education team, as well as Adobe Education leaders who will be sharing their classroom success stories, creative catalyst talks, as well as providing a range of practical workshops to help you make the most of your access to Adobe tools, especially the free Adobe Creative Cloud Express set of tools and resources. Register via adobe.ly/apac-edu-summit22 or scan this QR code. We are looking forward to sharing with you and your colleagues at the 2022 APAC Adobe Education Summit.
Well, that is it from me, and let me do a very, very warm introduction to Steve Nicholls, who's going to carry on from here. Over to you, mate.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tim. So I will steal the screen. And I have already got a little bit of Adobe Lightroom sitting on that screen. So what I'm going to do today is basically introduce what Adobe Photoshop Lightroom and Photoshop itself are and can do from a very basic standpoint. When I say very basic standpoint, try to get an idea of what it is that they are all about. And if you wanted to explore yourself and try to just step into this world and understand what these different applications, especially if I don't make it clear enough as I'm going through, what I've just opened up here is actually the Adobe Creative Cloud desktop application, which I just click on this little button up here, the Creative Cloud button, and the Creative Cloud desktop application pops into view. So if you've installed Creative Cloud, you have your Creative Cloud desktop application available to you. And within that, this is the primary area where I'll go in and check to see that all my applications are up to date, and that there might be some additional information that I can want to search through. So, you know, even to the point I now have in the Creative Cloud desktop application a few quick actions that are actually things that are powered by Photoshop, things like resize image, remove background. You'll see me actually do a couple of things with the concept of removing background on the way through, but these are automatic processes that I can actually process directly inside the Creative Cloud desktop app. I can even, you know, convert to PDF directly inside this application. So the Creative Cloud desktop app is something that I've always got open and I always have access to. But the reason that I really wanted to pop into here today was to just show in the tabs here, in the categories, there's the photo category. And this lists all of the applications that are specific to Adobe's Photoshop. And you can see actually that there are, and if I just move my mouse over the top of the icon, it just gives a bit of a sample of what Lightroom actually can do here. So Lightroom, and it tells me here that this is actually a desktop application, and Photoshop is a desktop application, Lightroom Classic a desktop application, and I've also got some mobile applications here as well. So Lightroom Mobile, Photoshop Mobile, Photoshop Camera, Photoshop Express. So all of these essentially Photoshop branded applications that have slightly different purposes and reasons for being. So Lightroom is a desktop application, but interestingly enough, Lightroom also is available as a web application as well. So here I have my web application at lightroom.adobe.com. All I've had to do is just log in with my credentials, and I see exactly the same application as that I have on my desktop, and also here with my mobile phone. This is actually my mobile phone just working away in the background as well. So this is Lightroom on both mobile, browser, and also on desktop as well. So this is what we call Adobe Photoshop Lightroom. If I pop back to the Creative Cloud desktop app again, you'll see that there's also this thing called Lightroom Classic. So one of the things that we did when we updated Lightroom is we made it this this cloud-based application, and not everybody has access to the cloud for ongoing use, and perhaps they don't even necessarily have fast internet and things like that. So, you know, for example, the Department of Defense, you know, has issues obviously uploading to cloud-based storage. So something like Lightroom, which stores things in the internet, in the Creative Cloud files, is not good for them. So we have this concept of Lightroom Classic as well, which is exactly the same application, but stores the images locally. So Lightroom is a cloud application. So if I wanted to have access to my images absolutely anywhere, whether I'm on somebody else's computer or on a mobile device or on my own computer, I have exactly the same photos available across all those different devices. And that's what Lightroom is intended to do. So I take a photograph, I upload it into Lightroom, and I have it available absolutely everywhere. Lightroom Classic sits on my desktop, and I just work on images locally. Photoshop is the gold standard of Adobe applications. It takes the concept of working with photographs that one step further. It's a creative tool that specializes in working with images. And as you can see, there's a little bit of a sample where you create a quick collage of various elements to bring your photos to life. And that's what Photoshop is all about. But Lightroom is an organizer for many images. Photoshop is for working creatively with photographs. So let's get started and crack on in. I should just ask very, very briefly, is there any actual questions about the differences between Photoshop and Lightroom before I go too much further? If you wanted to quickly pop into the chat and just ask a question, I'll see if I can answer those questions if I haven't made clear what the different applications are for. So Lightroom is
Hey, Steve.
Yeah.
Can I interrupt for a second? You know, when I see a professional photographer, just like at the football or whatever, I will often, and people hate this when I do it, I'll often go up to them and say, "Hi, do you use Photoshop or Lightroom?" And have a guess what 98% of professional photographers always say.
I'm guessing they're going to say they have Lightroom.
Yeah. Lightroom is what they use. And whenever you see a professional photographer on the sidelines of an AFL football, because we're talking to a South Australian audience here, Steve. So, and I'm from Victoria, so I'm talking about AFL, and there's so many photographers out there with their big lenses, and they've got a little laptop next to them. Usually it's covered up so they can see it through the sun. They're on Lightroom. That's exactly what they're using while they're taking the photos. Just thought I'd throw that out there. Back to you, Steve.
Absolutely. I see that there aren't any questions, so I think we're perfectly clear, Tim. People understand the difference between the applications. And of course, I'm going to show some things to make it absolutely clear. So I'm actually going to pop into the Lightroom desktop application, and you can see that I've got a collection of images there that are kind of my favorite, my 5-star images. And this is actually really the reason that Lightroom absolutely stands out, is that you can tag every image that you take, and you know, some are keepers, some are throw away type images, but you can tag images, you can create albums, to place those images into, and then you can start manipulating them a little bit further. And that's where Lightroom really stands out. So, you know, I went on a European holiday a number of years ago, and I, of course, have a lot of different favorite images. There's only 2,500 photos that I took on that particular trip, but, you know, there's going to be favorites that I've got. So all I've got to do in order to make one of those images pop into the favorites is just drag and drop it over. And then, you know, I've got 22 images inside my favorites from my Europe trip. So, and of course, I can always delete them from this particular album as well without deleting any actual images at all. So this is purely just an album for viewing all the specific images that I like. Okay, so what's the next thing that I would normally do in something like Lightroom that is a very typical process that I would actually do with my images? So I've got here an image that I shouldn't have taken. I probably shouldn't even use this in a demo, but I'm going to anyway. So this just happens to be some famous roof somewhere in a particular place called the Vatican, I believe. Again, I'm not supposed to take these photos, but I did. But it's going to be better if I actually rotate this image. So if I just click on my little crop and rotate, this is exactly the sort of thing that people need to do quite often. So, you know, perhaps they need to make something like this portrait, and that works absolutely perfectly for me. So crop and rotate, nice and simple here in Lightroom. But I've got a lot of other options here, and you know, this is where the new version of most Adobe applications really shine, in that, you know, I'm not cluttered with lots and lots of different controls. It's really very much a focus on the individual things that I'm actually dealing with. So if I do pop here into my edit mode, then I can see all of the different controls that I can start to bring to bear on this particular image. And one of the things, it's almost like a cheat mode that most of the Photoshop applications have, and there's this little auto button. And so auto will actually use auto settings, and it'll use the artificial intelligence of Photoshop to analyze and create the best possible settings for this image. So sometimes it's creativity that I want, sometimes I just want to see what auto does. And if I click on auto, it immediately actually brightens that image considerably. So if I just pop back and just undo what I just did, you can see that it's a little bit dull. Hopefully this comes across in Teams okay. By clicking on auto, it really brightens the image up, and I don't lose a lot of the detail by brightening, but you can see all of the different settings that's applied to it. So, you know, I can always pop in and just work a few of those shadows, maybe a little bit more, and it's going to make those adjustments on the fly. So this is what Lightroom does absolutely perfectly. Clicking on auto, making sure that the image is getting all of the best possible bits out of it, which is perfect. And something that is relatively new, again, lots of different options here. One of the options that we have is also just fixing up geometry, which I only discovered fairly recently. But if I click on this little guided upright, this is so cool. So, you know, it's really hard to get, you know, elements of an image straight. So what I want to do is actually just create a little bit of a straight line for this image to create a slightly distorted version of that image. And you can see it's actually done a quick straighten, remove some of the detail of that image. And that's pretty good for this image. But, you know, this is another example that is absolutely perfect for this sort of problem as well. So here, Lightroom, you know, if you've ever tried to take a photo of the Mona Lisa in the Louvre, you know that there's going to be, you're about 10, 15 people deep. You never quite can get to the spot that you want to take a nice straight on image. So using this concept inside Lightroom of straightening this image as well, it's absolutely perfect. So what I can do is just use the sides of the element here of the frame just to straighten this way, but also to straighten across the top as well. and the bottom. So I'm actually creating multiple different paths there to create a nice straightened version of the Mona Lisa. Then I can probably crop in a little bit to remove some of the detail. And I also have a couple of other little problems in this image, apart from the guy's head down the bottom. So I might actually crop that all together because it's going to be a little bit tricky inside Lightroom, but maybe, we'll see. What I'm going to do is just use one of these other tools here. So I'm just working through these amazing tools that we have inside Lightroom for, first of all, I went to the edit mode. I had a look at crop and rotate, but now I've got the healing brush to do some magic with. So the healing brush allows me to get some of the spots and problems with the image that otherwise might be a bit tricky to remove. And so I can actually use my square brackets to make that brush a little bit bigger, or I can just drag that spot there. So here I've got a little bit of a weird coloring on that particular part of the image, and I can just work around to find what will absolutely be perfect for removing that particular problem inside the image. And down here I've got something fairly similar, so I'm going to see if I can't use other portions of the image to just correct the image in a way that makes it a little bit nicer. Now I could do the same with his head here, and let's see if it actually can work the magic. So a little bit of messing around, find the area that's going to line up nicely. Again, a little bit more work and I'll get it absolutely right. So a little bit more of that area to get that absolutely perfect for me. Okay, and again, a little bit more work would be absolutely perfect to get rid of that. What I might do is actually take it into Photoshop, because Photoshop is better for doing this sort of stuff. But the really cool thing about everything that I'm doing inside Lightroom is that nothing that I have done so far has been destructive. I can always go, you know what, I've made a complete botch of this image. Let's go back to the original, and I can reset the edits to the original image. Everything that I do, I can step back in time and reset, because I'm not actually editing this image in any way, shape or form. I'm actually applying adjustments and adjustment concepts to the image without actually destroying the image in any way. If I wanted to change pixels and change the look and feel of the image, that's something that I would actually do inside Photoshop. That's where I take it to that next level. Just working through here, there's also another, so the healing brush allows me to get rid of some of those little blotches and weird little things that pop up on our images. But this masking button here, this is something that's relatively new and something that we can do quite some interesting things with. So just as an example here, I've got select subject, and what select subject will do will automatically find something that's specifically interesting inside this image, and it means that I can make adjustments just to that part of the image itself. So, I can really bump up the temperature of just the photo of the Mona Lisa here without actually touching the surrounds. So this I can do with any image. It's automatically applied this mask, which means that I'm only going to be adjusting this part of the image automatically. It did that just by clicking on this button over here and creating a mask by selecting the subject. So it again, completely automatic, does it itself. We can apply masks by hand, but this one's so much easier. So this concept of selecting the subject becomes something that we can use in so many different interesting ways in Lightroom. So you're getting an idea that what Lightroom's really great at doing is working through lots of images. And in fact, I can pop through a whole stack of different images and add things like metadata directly to these particular images. I can set ratings based on what I feel is a good rating for it. So a rating is purely for me just to find sets of images that are perfect. I can select individual images, and I can even use the keyboard commands to, so, you know, if I just select this top image, for example, I can hit 5 on the keyboard and it will apply 5 stars to this image. Now, I don't think it's a 4-star, it's probably more a bit of a 2-star. So I hit 2 on the keyboard and it does exactly the same thing. So in this case, I can do searches based on all of those different criteria as well, which is really useful. So again, Lightroom is great for organizing lots and lots of images and applying subtle changes to those images without going too far. So again, my starting point normally will be just to hit on auto to get the best possible contrast and color combinations inside that image, and then I can start messing around with some of the more complex adjustments to this this image. Okay, so Lightroom's absolutely wonderful, and of course, you know, the next step is always to take these sorts of images into Photoshop to fix up. But we can actually do so much without having to jump into Photoshop itself. I just spotted this image. It's not a great photograph, but I just thought it was absolutely classic when I was came across it. And this was, I think, in Italy. Genuine fake watches, absolutely fabulous. Okay, so Lightroom. The other thing that we recently popped into Lightroom is some of the search concepts that you'll probably see in so many different applications, a bit of artificial intelligence. So for example, you know, I can use people as a concept. And at the moment, I've actually disabled this feature, which you can enable to actually find different people inside images. So for example, this is my daughter, Kayla. If I click on Kayla, there she pops up in all the different images that I have inside my Lightroom library. By clicking on people again, I can find images of myself or even my other daughter, Elise. And again, it's pretty amazing how it picks the face out of some of these quite non-distinct images. So it's a very clever way of actually searching through. And we've even got Mona Lisa as a search here. So very clever the way it's actually working. So at the moment it's been disabled and it's still able to actually search through. So if I wanted to, I could turn that on and it will take a little while longer. So this will enable the people view to work through it. And I'm not going to turn it on just at the moment because it's going to slow my computer down while I'm actually doing this. But you just enable people view and the artificial intelligence engine will go through and find all the different faces within your Photoshop library, your Photoshop Lightroom library. So again, Lightroom is absolutely awesome for doing what I would consider the slog work of working with images. And you can see here we can add all sorts of different search terms to particular images and find out camera settings and other things and search for particular options inside our images. So absolutely awesome. Okay. Now, I've sort of quickly gone through what we can do in Lightroom, and really there is so much more that is possible just in terms of subtle changes and processing of images. And in fact, you know, the other possibility as well, of course, is doing things like exporting multiple images for various requirements, etc. But you know, I do really want to take things to the next level and start working inside Photoshop itself. So this is actually the great way that we can actually this is the great way that we can actually work with Photoshop together with Lightroom, in that Lightroom is, as I said, great for organizing all my images, but sometimes I just need to do that extra little thing inside Photoshop that only Photoshop can do. So this is where I would take an image like this smiling guy and edit this in Photoshop itself. And Photoshop will open up that image and I can start going to work on it. Now, why is this image something that I could only work on in Photoshop itself? Well, in this case, this guy is way too happy. He's absolutely killing it on the happiness scale. So I do want to do a little bit of work on him. And I've actually got the object selection tool selected here. And you know, every time I do this, it just blows me away, because when I was, you know, working for myself many, many years ago and working on things like Photoshop files, the concept that Photoshop would just automatically select a subject like this just absolutely blows me away, because in the past I would have had to grab things like the pen tool and carefully draw a cropping path around, a clipping path around this character. You know, obviously going to hair and things like that is absolutely impossibly difficult to do. So, you know, the capability to just go over the top of an image and it automatically knows that, oh, this is a subject. You clearly want to actually select that subject. And that's exactly what Photoshop's doing automatically for me without me having to adjust anything. So object selection tool allows me to select objects. But coming back to the problem at hand, he's way too happy. So something that we brought in relatively recently, about a year and a half ago or so, is something called neural filters. And it sounds really complex and something that I wouldn't want to touch because it sounds complex. But no, this is the coolest thing that you'll ever see inside Photoshop. So again, something that I can't do inside Lightroom, but I can inside Photoshop. Now, what Photoshop has done there is automatically figured out that there is a face in this image. And one of the possibilities that I have for this is to start working on the smart portrait capabilities of Photoshop. There's all sorts of featured options here that I have, like skin smoothing or zoom into areas. I can even colorize black and white images and transfer styles across. But this smart portrait is awesome. If I just turn it on, Photoshop will start to analyze this image. And some of the options that I have, in fact, it keeps on getting better and better, is I can actually remove some happiness from this image. So let's actually play with this and just slide it across. And what will happen is that the Photoshop will actually process this in the cloud. It will actually upload the image to an artificial intelligence engine and retrieve a result for me that I can then start to manipulate. And this is absolutely magic. So he's a little less happy, which is absolutely perfect for me. So I can really drop down that happiness. He's a little bit too smirky, but you know, you do what you can. Now, if I bump that happiness way up, he'll start smiling again. And, you know, I can even take it to an absolute extreme, and it automatically manipulates his face to the point of extreme. So, and this is the other thing that we can start playing with. So my portrait photo from Tim's sessions was from 10 years ago. So really what I should have done is just use my facial age concepts here. So we can remove some age from this dude, or we can make him nice and old. So again, Photoshop is for good, not evil. So don't do this to all your friends. No, of course you'll have to do this to all your friends. It's awesome. So this is neural filters and some of the options that we have. So, you know, facial age is absolutely extraordinary. Yes, I know, isn't it? It really is amazing. So that's a neural filter. Now, one of the really cool things about Photoshop is that when I do save this out, so I'm going to, let's pop his facial age up and maybe, you know, thin his hair out just a smidge there. And I get the perfect photograph for me. So I can even do, you know, some eye direction, which is pretty crazy. So he's not necessarily looking at the camera. So once I'm happy with what's actually being created, the output here is actually to a new layer. So again, the capability of Photoshop compared to Lightroom is that it's a creativity tool that we can start working with, and that it allows us to work with multiple layers of an image. So what that neural filter did is actually created a brand new layer of the photograph for me. So in my layers panel here, I can actually turn on or off the original image. So I can just take the layer of the top layer and turn that off and see the image that was there previously. So Photoshop has non-destructively applied that filter to this image, and I can always take a little bit back from the original if I so wish. So again, the neural filters are something that is absolutely extraordinary. So let's actually just grab Lightroom again and do something quite amazing as well. So I've got this elephant photograph that I also want to edit. So you'll see me do this a lot, but I use Lightroom as my source of all my images, and then I'll start being creative inside Photoshop. So in this case, let's just have a look at the layers of this image, and you can see that it is a single layer of this great elephant. But from my perspective, what I wanted to do is have it as a little bit more of an action photo. So I want to move his trunk. So you'd think absolutely impossible, and certainly not something that I would do in Lightroom. Lightroom's all about manipulating the tints and tones of the image and working on lots of different images. Photoshop is for being creative in. So what I'm going to do is actually apply a filter that's actually called Puppet Warp to this particular image. So in order to get this started, what I'm going to do is actually select our subject again. So if I click on select object selection tool, what will happen is it will start to work away, but I can also just click on select subject here in my tools, and you can see that it's selected my elephant for me. So what I'm going to do with this is actually just copy that and then paste. Whenever I copy and paste something in Photoshop, it actually creates another layer. So I can bring layers together and things, but what it's done is actually create a layer for my elephant there. And just by turning off the visibility of the background, you can see that the option that's being done there. So there's a little bit more to select, but that's okay. For this purpose, I only need this part of the elephant. But I want to do it in such a way that when I do move this guy's trunk here, it's not going to affect in any way, shape or form the background. I want the background to actually appear unaffected. So I've just turned off the visibility of the top layer, and I'm going to do something magical with my elephant here. I'm going to select him again, and I'm going to go to my content aware fill option of Photoshop. So what it will do is bring up another dialog here, and it will add fill based on what's around this image. And you can see what it's actually done, if I click OK, is it's made the elephant disappear. There's still a few remnants there, which is fine. So I can always turn on the visibility of my top layer, but it's added some extra grass and bush and other bits into this image. Now, again, I didn't have to be too pedantic with that to get that to happen. It's just applied it's filled in those areas to make the background appear a little bit more uniform, which will allow me to do this amazing thing here. So I'm going to select this top layer and apply my Puppet Warp to this top layer. And again, Photoshop just automatically figures out what's inside my image, and you can see it's created a little bit of a mesh for me. So from this point, I can just click a few pins in my elephant. And what I'm doing is just making sure that he doesn't move around too much for me, because what I can do with this is then start to move his trunk. And once I'm happy with the way that looks, I can click OK, and there I've actually moved his trunk. So with a couple of quick steps, I've used Puppet Warp inside Photoshop. So if I go back to my Puppet Warp, I can then manipulate that even further. So nothing is real anymore. You can do so many creative things inside your images in just amazing ways. It just often blows me away just how quickly and how much fun you can have with Photoshop. So again, creativity that we can create. So using Puppet Warp, it figures out everything that's inside your image, and you just click a few pins to move the objects around. It is absolutely incredible. So you can have so much fun with these sorts of images. Okay, so I'll just pop back to Lightroom. And I wanted to show another quick option here that, again, just shows the capabilities of Photoshop in very quick ways. It was a great summer that we were in Europe, and this can sometimes be a bit of a problem where you go from place to place. You often only have a single day to get all the photographs that you want, and you don't always have absolutely perfect conditions for every image that you have. I'd say that the sky was actually pretty good for this particular photograph, but places like London don't always behave themselves and have perfect lighting. But inside Photoshop, we have ways to improve reality. We can improve reality, and edit sky replacement is one of those ways that we can fix what might have actually been a lesser image and make it even better. So in sky replacement, what Photoshop again is doing is automatically figuring out the area of our photograph that is sky, and it has completely changed the look and feel of my image. And I can do things like remove all the clouds. So apply a completely different sky. I can even start working down and figuring out, I didn't take a nighttime image of London, but I can always come into sky replacement and apply that. And the really cool thing about what's actually happening, if I click OK inside Photoshop, again, this is just one click, edit sky replacement, and it's done all the things that I want it to do. If I pop into layers, what's automatically happened here is it's actually done a huge amount of work in a very short space of time. So it's created little masks. So if I just turn off the visibility of certain elements of this image here, it's created this new sky background. It's masked the elements of my original image, and it's even applied some foreground color to the foreground of my image. So if I do turn that on, it's only a slight adjustment and a very, very slight adjustment, and suddenly the foreground is also matching the difference of the sky in this particular image. Yeah, I know it is so transferable. So many of these things now are just really, really quick and easy. In the past, I would have spent an age trying to figure out how to actually mask this image and then replace it with something else. It just does it so automatically. It's amazing. I love things like sky replacement. Now, that actually brings me to, there is so much inside Photoshop, and let's see if I can grab another image that is perfect for what I would consider relatively simple fixes. So, here, it was a great day again in the English countryside at some place called Stonehenge. And one of the things that you can't really control when you're on holidays is all the tourists that come along with you. So, you know, I'd really like to have this image in such a way that I'm removing some of the extraneous people that have popped into the image. Now, there's two different ways that I can do this. Remember in Lightroom, we had that spot healing that you could apply to a specific image. We can do the exact same thing here inside Photoshop. So Photoshop, as soon as I click on my spot healing brush, it gives me this little spot that's it's a little bit hard to see, but I'll pop it up into the sky. And I can use the square brackets again to make that larger. And you can actually see up here in my brushes the size that I'm creating. So if I make it really large, you can see that the brush is way too big now, but it is actually this brush here, and it gets bigger and smaller. And I can use the brackets, square brackets on my screen. Oops, I managed to screw that up. Square brackets, open and close on my keyboard to make that bigger and smaller. The reason I'm doing that is that I don't want too big a brush to just sweep across my my tourists there. So I'm just going to very quickly brush those people out, and voila, they are gone. Magic trick number one. So I have actually done this in such a way that it's not the advisable way to do it. It's always good to do things non-destructively inside Photoshop. So I'm going to undo that a couple of times. The way to do exactly, at the moment, again, this Photoshop file hasn't got layers. I haven't actually applied any adjustments to this image in any way, shape or form. It's just using the background pixels. So the background is actually locked, as you can see. So if I do those changes, I can't actually creatively, and if I save that, those pixels are now gone. So I'm going to undo what I just did. And I'm actually going to apply a new layer that's just empty. It has nothing in it to my Photoshop file. And now when I use my spot healing brush, so this is starting to get a little bit more technical, is that when I use my spot healing brush on this this tourist, what I'm going to do is get it to sample all layers. And what sample all layers will do is it will do exactly the same thing as I did before, but this time it's applied the effect to the top layer. So I'll do the rest of the tourists here and just go carefully onto this guy, and voila, they're gone again. But what's really cool is that if I just turn off the visibility of the background, you can see the mask that's been applied. And if I turn off the visibility of the front, what I've actually done is applied that content aware fill concept with my spot healing brush tool to the top layer. So as soon as I turn that top layer on, you can see what's been added to the image. Turn it off, and they're still there. So what I've done is created a non-destructive extra layer to my image. So now that if I save this image, all of those elements are still there. Now, if I save it as a JPEG from this image, that will then flatten the image and go to the version that I want to keep as a, maybe I want to pop up on my website, for example. But as a creative person, I want to have all the information still there so I can always drag it back. So that's our spot healing brush, which again is absolutely amazing. You can get rid of those annoying extra relatives very easily, and apply it non-destructively, so we can always bring them back if they get upset with us. So a couple of other fun things in there. We've got a red eye tool, which is just drag across red eye and it automatically fixes it. But spot healing, always absolutely amazing. Okay, I love those particular tools. Now, the other concept that people find quite difficult, people often think of Photoshop as being extremely complex in lots of different ways, but often it's actually far less complex than you would at first think, and some of that again has come because of the new tools that have been created for us that absolutely help us to be creative with Photoshop. And this is a great example of something that is very commonly required. And I'm just going to use my object selection tool again. So again, it's automatically done it for me. It always blows me away. You can actually drag and drop over the top of an object as well, and it will do maybe even a slightly different version of that selection, but it does a great job. And in fact, if I want to remove parts of a selection, I can as well. So, maybe it's gone a little bit too far up the top here, and I want to remove parts of the selection. So what I do is hold down the Alt or Option key and remove parts of that selection. Pardon me. So I can just let it do its work, or I can just click and drag across the option that I want. So I've got a selection here for my mini, and I want to change its color. And you think, oh, that must be so hard to do. But again, Photoshop makes these sorts of things pretty easy once you know just a couple of little quick things about it. So if I do bring out my layers panel, what I can do with any particular layer is add what's known as blend modes and filters to my photographs. And one of those is called hue saturation. So I can apply hue saturation across an entire image or to specifics, but by using the layers panel and my options here, which is just down here on my panel, it's create a new fill or adjustment layer. What this adjustment layer will do is allow me to change just the hue and saturation of what I have selected. So if I click on hue and saturation, the properties of the hue and saturation panel will actually become visible to me. And what hue and saturation gives me the ability to do is just do things like drop the lightness. So I can make it part of the image very dark or very light. I can blow it out. I can desaturate, which means removing all the color from that image. Can make it very vibrant as well. Or I can even change the color of elements within this image. So again, if I'm very selective with what I've got selected, I can change the color of my mini just by dragging these options out and around. So in the layers panel, what I have is a hue saturation adjustment layer that I can turn on or off. So this is where Photoshop starts to get a little bit more complicated, but again, can do absolutely amazing things. So it automatically applies an adjustment layer and a mask to it by creating this new if I just pop over the top of it, a new fill or adjustment layer. So again, does it automatically for me. Love that capability. Okay, so again, it's another element of what Photoshop can do, but it starts to make it feel a little bit more complex. So what if I wanted to learn more about Photoshop? What I do is I go into my Photoshop help. Sounds obvious, but what's really cool about Photoshop help now is that it's not just help. What it is a series of hands-on tutorials, quick actions, and other ways to actually work with Photoshop. So it's actually a kind of a live panel. So it allows me to actually work with help based on the image that I have in the background here. So in this case, I might actually go back a couple of steps with my mini and just remove that that hue saturation layer, because I want to do something a little bit tricky with this particular photograph. Because one of the quick actions that I have, if I click on quick actions, we can see some of those things like remove background that is now part of the Creative Cloud desktop application as well. But using these quick actions to actually do multiple things in a short space of time, including things like blur background. So again, I don't need to know anything about Photoshop at all to actually see how this gets applied. And you can see inside the Discover panel precisely what's actually happened. So what it's done is automatically selected and masked the front, and it's applied a Gaussian blur to the background. And if I look in my layers panel, it's done all of this automatically and in the right way. So again, I don't need to know anything about Photoshop and what particular things need to be added to an image to actually see how it gets applied. So, you know, if I pop into my layers panel, I can bring this Gaussian blur up even higher just to blur the background even more. And you can see how it's actually applying that blur to it, all automatically through the Discover panel here. That actually helps me out. So again, you know, if I wanted to remove that effect, just delete it from my layers. What else is in here? This is a hands-on tutorial, sets of hands-on tutorials, and these are awesome. The best thing about these hands-on tutorials is that they bring in the actual sample files themselves. So if I click into orientation, for example, getting to know the app, maybe one of the classics is, you know, adding an image. So let's actually step through this and see how this actually works. Adding an image. So if I click on add an image, what it'll do is tell me what's next to do. So click on start tutorial, and this Discover panel will actually bring in this image for me. It tells me in the next step, you'll choose a photo from your computer to appear on the phone screen. A vertical image will fit best for this. So for example, use a JPEG or a PSD file. So I'm going to click on the next, and it tells me to go File, Place Embedded. So I can place an embedded image into this document. So I've got some images on my desktop. So let's see, I might grab a Venice photo here and click on place. All right, so it says, find your photo, select it and click and place. When it appears, drag any of the small white squares to resize it so it roughly covers the phone. Okay, so the squares need to be dragged down. One of the fun things with Photoshop, this is slightly doing it in a way that I never used to do, is that it by default keeps everything constrained. So I'm just going to move the Discover panel over to the right. So I've just moved this image around into my phone a little bit. So what I mean by constrained is that when I drag these corners around, it's not distorting the image in any way, shape or form. This is actually because of the options here in the options path panel inside Photoshop. If I wanted to distort it, what I actually do is hold down, pardon me, the Shift key. I can distort that image. And I don't really know why I'd want to distort it, but you can if you so want. All right, so in this project, so click next to continue, it says again. I think I just had to click enter. Okay, so what is it saying? The image you placed is now a new layer above previously active phone layers. So click next. All right, so we're going to go through that and actually drag that below. And that now is actually below that image. So that's excellent. Okay, I've done that. So the image of the click next to continue. I'm trying to click next and it's decided that I've bugged up. But anyway, I'm going to exit that tutorial and I could actually save it out. But you can see that what I've done is actually dragged that image and placed it onto my phone. And by moving it around, by placing an image over the top, I've been able to duplicate those two together. So again, what it's doing is stepping us through step by step through the concept of actually working inside Photoshop. So the Discover panel is awesome for doing this. Okay, don't save. So there are so many different tutorials in here. So again, it rates some of the elements of it, and it also that adds the actual files that are necessary to complete it. So when I come to do, the sorts of things that I really want to do, then I've got, the basis of actually working on it. So for example, what I want to do is actually add the Adobe logo to this image. So again, I pop into Photoshop here and say place embedded, and then I actually find the Adobe logo that I want to include in my project. And if I click on place, then that logo will actually appear as a separate layer that I can place onto my Photoshop file. The interesting thing about this particular logo, if I pop into layers, and as soon as I hit enter, it will actually place that, is that what I've done is actually placed what's known as a scalable vector graphic into my file. And if I zoom in quite close, you can see that the pixels that are there, and if I zoom out, what would normally happen with a file that I've placed into Photoshop, and then I've done something like zoom it in and out, such as what I've just done, I'd actually be disturbing the pixels. But if I zoom in nice and close again, those pixels are not, they're actually scaling every time that I do scale it. So I'm going to scale this image again and drag it down. By doing this up and down a few times, what normally would happen is those pixels would start to get destroyed. But because I placed that file into Photoshop, and it is a scalable vector graphic, it maintains its scale. So if I double click on that layer, instead of opening up inside Photoshop, and all I did was place that image, that scalable vector graphic is actually opening up inside Adobe Illustrator. And Illustrator maintains perfect paths for vector graphics. And that's why that particular image is absolutely perfect for manipulating the size of it inside Photoshop, because it will always be as good as it possibly can be depending on the actual pixels of that image. So I love the capability to blend multiple images together. And it doesn't have to be a logo. I can actually place, as I did before, the photo over the photo. So grab some of these other images and place them in, and make collages of multiple images, creates a separate layer, and actually gives me the capability to go into the original and still manipulate it in interesting ways. So if I double click on this layer, because it was a Photoshop file, it opens up in Photoshop and I can make edits to this image, which is very, very cool. So again, the way that Photoshop works is so much easier for us now than it would have been in the past. In the past, I probably would have lost some pixels there just bringing in additional images, but now it works in the way that is absolutely perfect, that I don't have to necessarily learn all the really detailed elements of what Photoshop's all about. But as I said, it's the best way to actually get into Photoshop and start learning it is to actually step through some of these tutorials that give you that step-by-step guide of what Photoshop's all about. So, if you're looking for something specific to do, Photoshop gives you those tools for actually figuring out what it is that you're actually after. And you can even do a quick search for trying to understand maybe what masks are all about. So you can search for masking, and it'll give you the tutorials or the hands-on tutorials or the help that will actually step you through the process of actually what it's all about. Here we have get to know layers. So again, it gives you the tutorial and understanding of what each of those elements is all about. So I think I've been going for quite some time, and I really think it should be, it's more than enough, I think, for most of our brains to be going on a online tutorial for around about an hour. So what I might do is just stop and see if there's any questions that people might have come across in using Photoshop before, and see if we can answer some of those. And hopefully I've made clear the difference between working in Lightroom and working in Photoshop itself. So I might just see if there's any questions that people.
Thanks, Steve. It's been fantastic so far. So if you do have a question for Steve, feel free to pop it in the chat or come off mute and ask away.
Absolutely. Lots to try out with students. That's really good to know, Chloe. Yeah, no, absolutely. And kids pick these things up so quickly as well. So it's definitely really cool.
Yes, I will upload the file and send out a link to everyone that's registered.
Will the layers be stored in Photoshop file? So if I do save this file, and so this original image is actually a JPEG. So if I go File Save, because there's multiple layers, it automatically tells me, okay, you've got layers, save it as Photoshop. It won't even give me the option to save as a JPEG. So if I click Save, it will save as a PSD file, and will automatically now be minicooper.psd. So this is one of those things that, if I wanted to commit all those changes to an image and I didn't want to go backwards, I would save it as a JPEG and not save as a multi-layered file. But having all the multiple layers means that I can always make changes to what I've actually done. Any of the creative effects, etc., are maintained, and I can go backwards and actually fix them. If I wanted to then pass that changed image on, I'd probably save it as a JPEG and email that. So that's a really good question. Do I have the straighten? Oh, that's such a good question. I love that question. Okay, do I have the straighten tool like I do in Lightroom? Absolutely. And in fact, I've got the perfect sample file for this. This is so awesome. Okay, slightly different possibility, but I've got lots of different possibilities. So the crop tool is actually a tool that I can use here. So you can see I've got a straighten tool. So one of the things that people might often do is just not necessarily have a nice straight straight horizon. So you can actually use the straighten tool that we've got here with the crop tool. I'm just going to not commit that, but I want to take this a step further and actually use the perspective crop tool. Okay, so the perspective crop tool is very similar to what I was doing inside Lightroom. So what I can do with the perspective crop tool is just select areas of my image and build out this selection. So what I'm looking for is just those straight edges of the buildings. And I'll just drag that around so it's roughly about right. So I'm just grabbing each of the corners, and then I click on the commit button, and voila, straight buildings. Absolutely amazing. So that's the perspective crop tool. So it does a crop and straighten for me automatically. Bit of a combination, but having the actual just flat straighten tool is also really useful as well, because for whatever reason, when you're taking photographs, people have one, you know, either left or right dominant, and you often find that you don't quite have that perfect, nice straight horizon. How's that, David? Pretty cool. The other cool thing about the crop tools as well is that you can actually organize it so it doesn't actually delete any of the cropped pixels as well. Yeah, it's nice and easy, isn't it? It's very cool. Just got to know it's there. It's one of those hidden tools behind the crop tool. So you just got to click on the actual crop tool itself, find that. Sometimes the list of these tools also appears a little bit different. So one of the things that it's always good to just check is what workspace that you have applied at the moment, because resetting these different workspaces will mean some of the different tools and panels and other things will move around, and you think, oh, I haven't got it, but it's just a different way of actually organizing all of the different panels. So I've got at the moment the essentials, but if I was going into, say, photography or painting, etc., I just choose one of these different options. And as you can see, the amount of things that we have as panels keeps on growing and growing and growing. So there is so much more to Photoshop than what we've shown today, that don't want to quite bend our brains too far just yet. Oh, contrasty photo. What do you do to even it out? So it's a really good problem, and can be a little bit tricky depending on the actual image. So let me see. So this where's the? I've got it inside Lightroom. The photo that I've got with our elephant. So I could do this inside Lightroom, but very similarly inside Photoshop, we have a bunch of different adjustments that we can apply. Now, I do want to do these things non-destructively, but I could do adjustments directly on the actual photo itself. So this is where we go into things like shadows and highlights to actually figure our image a little bit. So the best place to actually work is inside adjustment layers. So I pop into adjustment layers and add things like levels or exposure. So what we do is just test out which one's absolutely perfect for our image. So, you know, we can just sort of drop the exposure and then play with the various elements of this image. And again, you can do this by doing selective areas, using masks, etc. Or you can do this via just across the entire image. The other option that I'll often start with, as I mentioned before, is actually popping into, say, levels and clicking on auto to get the auto set worked initially. So again, just working on the properties within, in this case, this is levels for this particular image. So in levels, what I can see is the white point and the black point of an image, and you can see where it started off. There's very little actual white or what is it, pixels that are blown out in this area. So by dragging this area back and then just working the midpoints, what I often can do is get a little detail back. So I often use both a combination of things. Also shadow highlights is often a way to actually fix those sorts of options. So in that case, that would be, I've actually lost my shadow highlights and I can't see automatically, but I think they're under, in fact, they might have even disappeared. Here we go, shadow highlights. And shadow and highlights allows me to be very selective about where within shadows and highlights I can make adjustments to an image. Now, again, by going to the image menu here and going to adjustments and shadow highlights, I'm actually being destructive on this photograph. But what I always like to do is actually convert an image for smart filters. As soon as I do apply smart filters to an image, some of the options actually disappear, but I still can use shadows and highlights and apply the shadows and highlights non-destructively to the image. So I'll actually bring back some of the options that I have. So shadows and highlights is awesome for working on those sorts of contrasty images. So if there's no detail that I can work in, so if I zoom into this area, it's really, really white. There's no actual detail that's there. There's nothing that I can much do with that. But if there is detail I can work with the shadows highlights options that I have as a smart filter inside Photoshop. So in order to bring on those smart filters for this particular image, what I did was I actually just made this image, first of all, convert it for smart filters. It actually makes it what's known as a smart object. So it basically embeds the Photoshop file inside Photoshop. And then I'll add my adjustments of shadows and highlights. Bring in some sky. Yes, I can add sky if I so wish. So let's actually add some sky to this image and see how that looks. So if we pop into sky replacement, let's see if it actually works nicely for this. Oh, look at that, absolutely perfect. So that, close that. And there's our beautiful sky and our elephant. How cool is that? So quick too. So just to recap, so the levels, curves and exposure do help, but shadow highlights also allows us to go very specific areas of the various tints and tones of shadows and highlights. Cool, some really good questions coming through. Gotta love Photoshop. Can you re-show how to alter the foreground image? Yes, I can, absolutely. So let's just undo what I've done there. And so this is the starting point of that image. So what I did was I selected the elephant using the object selection tool. So that selects our elephant. And if I just want to add some selection there, so that gets the majority of it. And what I've done is I've done a copy and paste. That gives me just the elephant on a separate adjustment layer there. So it just by copying and pasting, it just copies and pastes that little bit. So I've still got the background, and if I turn off the foreground, it looks exactly the same. So what I wanted to do is actually change that background layer. So I'm going to use the same concept of selecting that area. So make sure I've got everything absolutely selected perfectly. Perfect. And then what I can do is use the content aware fill concept of Photoshop to remove the elephant. So it actually just puts grass where the elephant used to sit, because the elephant is still there, you know, because I've got the visibility that I can turn back on. But I wanted this sort of grassy area of the background, so that when I do move its trunk, there's some grass underneath it. So then I select that top layer. I make sure I actually select that top layer, and I can use the puppet warp on that top layer. And Photoshop automatically figures out all the pixels that are on that particular layer. So, you know, by having a separate layer with just the elephant, it means it knows automatically that this is the area that I want to make changes to. So just by clicking the pins in various areas means I can distort from that spot there. So that doesn't look so good, but you know, I just want to bring the elephant's trunk to exactly where I would like it to sit. So, you know, I can sort of distort it up this way. The more pins, the more I'd manipulate each of those elements to get it to exactly where I'd like it to go. So it's actually something that they popped into After Effects, and they have taken this into Photoshop as well. So After Effects, you can actually change things over time as well. So in your videos, you can stretch people's arms out and do all sorts of weird and wonderful things. But by doing this inside Photoshop, the concept there is that the puppet will figure out what can actually be manipulated. If I did it without actually adding that background, then of course the background would also be distorted. So I need to actually separate the character from the background and fill in the background so that when I move it, it doesn't look like the original. So just a little bit of a trick there. Too easy. Okay. Is there a super easy way to get rid of the old trunk ghosting? Oh, get rid of the old trunk. Oh, yeah. So the problem that I did there is, because I did it so quickly, what I should have done is that if I just go back a few steps, that ghosting, if I undo to the point where I've got my background, when I've got that selection there, what I would normally do if I'm doing this properly is actually just grow my selection just a little bit. So in this area, you can click on, the selection's already done. So what you do is just click on grow selection, and you can just add the amount of pixels that you need to add. So by growing the selection a little bit, it means that that little ghosting area would actually get removed. And also another method was, once I've got that that area filled with content aware fill, and click OK, I can always come in here and make some adjustments to that with our things like our spot healing brush, for example. So just make it look a little bit more realistic in various different ways. So anything that looks like it needs a little bit of a touch up, you know, I can apply with our content aware fill brush. I've been really radical there with it, but it's still pretty good, just going across it. So now add my elephant to the foreground again, and it looks even better. Perfect. So that once you have something selected, it's always pretty easy to actually do things like extend the selection a little bit. Cool. Okay, I think we're running hard up on time. Is the head of the
We
hour.
are indeed, Steve, and I think, well, I've certainly learned a lot from this session, some great new things to try out, and especially that help section where you can probably direct your students to go through some of those tutorials as well. And as a teacher, we're always looking for ways to extend our students when we don't have all the answers ourselves. So that's fantastic.
No, some of them are very complicated and interesting too. So they start off nice and easy and extend out.
So I think we're dead on 5 o'clock, and I think most of us have had our minds blown. So we might say a big thank you to you, and hopefully we see you later on in the year. So thank you very much, and we'll hopefully catch you later.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Definitely a great session. Very much